you who don't know me, my name is Pet Henshaw, and I'm one half of Dandelion Learning. All my contact details are on this first slide. So if after this session you have any questions, then do drop me an email at info@dandelionlearning.org. So this morning we are going to look at the summer briefing for primary English leads, and we're going to be looking specifically at effective intervention. So keep up and catch up in reading. So what really makes the difference? We're also going to have a little bit of time looking at reading comprehension, why the use of questioning alone isn't the answer. So a little bit of time to consider that, and then some important dates for the school diary this term for English. So we'll jump straight into it and look at effective intervention. So keep up and catch up in reading. What makes the difference? Let's go. So we've got this very depressing statistic from Ofsted in their latest English subject review. Over 1 in 4 pupils still move to secondary school without having met the expected standard in the Key Stage 2 National Reading Test. Now, we know that National Reading Test doesn't give us a complete picture about what children can do in terms of reading and what they're like as readers, but actually taking that statistic into account, I think, is really important, because we know, of course, that basic level allows children to access the wider curriculum. So here from the DFE, they say that those children who fail to learn to read early on often start to dislike reading. They read less than others and less often. They don't accumulate the background knowledge and vocabulary from reading that their peers do. The word rich get richer, while the word poor get poorer. So we know that it's a vicious cycle. So that early identification is absolutely key in terms of early reading. So once we identify that children are at risk of falling behind in phonics, making sure that we've got that targeted support for them. So we know that a lack of fluency in reading, a lack of that automaticity in decoding really impacts on children's enjoyment and comprehension of reading, and that impacts in terms of access to the curriculum. So Ofsted tell us that there are some key things that successful schools do to make the difference in terms of early reading. One of the things is providing that targeted help for identified pupils in the phonics lesson. So for some children, that might be enough. So some additional extra adult support within that core phonics session. Some schools, in the second bullet point, some schools organise pupils into groups for phonic lessons according to the grapheme, phoneme correspondences that they know. With this bullet point, I think it is really important just to keep a sharp eye on the fact that are children catching up? So if we're streaming essentially for phonics, and I know lots of the DFE validated SSP programs, synthetic programs, really advocate streaming for phonics, and that's fine. But if you've got groups of children who are working below where they should be, just keeping that eye on, do they need an additional session? So the last bullet point there, extra practice in addition to the phonics lesson for children who need the most support. Because if we have children who are going out and if we're streaming for phonics and we've got children who are learning phonics that essentially below where they should be, then what's our game plan in terms of ensuring that those children catch up and meet the expectation of that phonics screening check, which of course just gives us one picture in terms of what they can do as readers, but actually that phonics screening check, we want the majority of our children, all our children if possible, to meet that expectation at the end of year 1. So if we are streaming for phonics, just thinking about those lower groups, what are we doing to ensure that we accelerate their progress? Now, the third bullet point there, I think, is really important, regularly reassessing pupils so that they're in a group where they can make the best progress. So assessment is absolutely key when it comes to phonics, early identification, making sure that we are targeting the right gaps, etc. And the DFE tell us that in the reading framework, that children at risk of falling behind are identified within the first 3 weeks of their starting in reception and continue to be assessed until they can read fluently. And they have extra daily phonics practice with a well-trained adult. So assessment, really important, and identifying those gaps, really important, whether we're working in reception, year 1, or year 2 and key stage 2. So if children are struggling with their reading and they're struggling with decoding, it's looking at, okay, what GPCs don't they know? What don't they know? And are we targeting them effectively? So, and that's one of the biggest criticisms from Ofsted in their latest English subject report, is that we're not targeting those gaps precisely enough. So making sure that our screening allows for that real fine tuning in terms of assessment. Now, I know most schools have got and are using an SSP that is validated by the DFE. If you don't have an SSP, of course, Smart Kids do the free planning and free assessment. So some schools are using this for Key Stage 2 children. So wherever possible, let's use the assessment and screening pack that comes with our SSP for Key Stage 1, for reception in Key Stage 1. But if we're looking for something different at Key Stage 2, and the DFE say that that's absolutely acceptable, then perhaps using something that is a little bit more age appropriate can be really useful. So biggest criticism from Ofsted in that latest report is that we are not targeting those gaps effectively enough. So really important, that assessment and screening when we notice that children are falling behind. The other aspect to consider for children who are struggling is the importance of early literacy experiences. So essentially that phonological awareness. Now, this is the stuff that's done at preschool, of course, and we used to think of as phase 1 letters and sounds. Those of us that have been working with phonics for a very long time. That phonological awareness really does pave the way to children becoming successful once they start a systematic synthetic phonics program. So it's about making sure that if you have children who are struggling with their phonics, let's just check their phonological awareness. So do they have general sound discrimination? Can they tell you the difference in terms of environmental sounds? So can they tell you the difference between the bird tweeting and the roar of the tractor, for example? That general sound discrimination is really important. Can they tell you the difference between instrumental sounds? That's key, because if they can't do those things, they'll find it harder to develop that awareness of the difference between phonemes. And that oral blending and segmenting is absolutely key. And I've done that from really, really young, that young age with my little one, where we play things like guess the word in the car on the way to school in the morning. So I'll say, and she'll say frog. And then she'll give me one to guess. So that oral blending, that oral segmenting really does pave the way to children becoming successful once they start that sort of formal SSP in reception. The first bullet point there, rhyme, rhythm and alliteration. Again, really important. If children can't give you a string of rhyming words, they're going to find spelling really harder later. So rhythm, there's a little bit of research out there now that says that children's ability in terms of rhythm can predict their ability in terms of grammar later on, which I can understand that link actually. So it's really fascinating. But alliteration, really key. So all those games that are played at preschool, things like Granny's in the Garden, where we're coming up with a character. So the mouse is in the mountains eating macadamia nuts, all those sorts of activities that are the hallmark of good early years practice. Those things support children to pave the way to successful phonics and successful reading. So if you have children who are struggling, don't forget, yes, we are going to be screening in terms of GPCs, but also just unpicking, have they got those foundations for phonics? And then it comes to organisation. So for some children, group catch-up will work absolutely fine. Particularly we find in the early stages, where children have similar needs, that they're just falling behind the programme, but they have similar needs that can be grouped together so that we could target those GPCs. As children move through the school, if you have struggling readers who are older, quite often one-to-one support is needed, because of course the gaps in their knowledge is so different. And so what we find is that 10 minutes every single day on a one-to-one basis actually is much more efficient and effective than half an hour as a group, because the group's needs are so different. So just unpicking that and just thinking about what would work best for the individual child. And of course it's manpower, that's a big issue. Budget is a big issue for schools, but just reflecting on the organisation of intervention, particularly for older children. And then the other criticism from Ofsted in that latest report is that children, particularly older children who need catch up, are not getting enough time. They're not getting that daily teaching to address their weaknesses in reading. And again, that's budgets and timetables, etc. But we can't have a situation where Ofsted are saying, of course, that over 1 in 4 children are leaving for secondary school without that basic reading ability. So are they getting that daily teaching? And little and often we find works better than one big chunk once a week. So do children receive that intensive daily teaching, just to make sure that we're targeting those gaps? And then thinking about what's happening in catch up and keep up. Now, are we doing the right things? We want to be spending time making sure that they have internalized those GPCs. So we know which GPCs they don't know or they're not secure with. And then we make sure that we are using our mnemonic cards to address those areas of need. And children need to know these at a glance. That's really important. It needs to be in their bellies, in their bones, instinctive. So you show them, and they say, They don't go, and you have to go, as in thumb, for example, or I, as on the screen here, as in light. So it needs to be instinctive, because what happens is if children don't know those sounds at a glance, those GPCs at a glance, by the time you layer that blending skill on top, their working memory is overloaded. And we know that they need those GPCs at a glance so that then they can focus on the process, the skill of blending through the word. So really important that we spend that time internalizing, revisiting, teaching explicitly those GPCs they don't know. And for older children, the DFE tell us that older children still need an SSP program. But they say that for older children who are still at the earliest stages of learning to read, schools might want to avoid programs specifically designed for younger children and consider those with age-appropriate lessons, as well as reading materials that develop pupils' decoding and fluency. So the school's SSP at Key Stage 1 may work fine. And it will work fine for your children. But for some children, particularly year 5, 6, we want to avoid things that look babyish. And I've got some schools who are using those smart kids mnemonic cards. So again, DFE validated, but they just have a photograph image. So for older children, that can work really well. I think they look a little bit 1970s, but actually it just takes that sort of primary aspect away from it, and it looks a little bit more grown up. And as I say, we've got special schools who are using these with young people up to age 18. So those 44 sound cards, but there are other mnemonic cards that run alongside those that are quite useful. And they've got, Smart Kids have got a web-based app that is due out this month too, which again, sort of an interactive whiteboard type program can work well for older children. So that's something, I'll put the link in there so you can have a look at that if that's something you're looking for. I've also put the link in for Brooks's What Works for Literacy Difficulties. Now, I find this really useful, so it's a very long link there, but if you just Google Brooks's What Works for Literacy Difficulties, 6th edition is the one that you're looking for, that's the latest one. What they do is they look at literacy intervention programs and they rate them in terms of how effective they are. So they look at the research behind them and they will say, oh, this had significant impact, for example, or remarkable impact. So a useful document for English leads and head teachers. And then it's thinking about, well, what's happening within our catch-up sessions. Now, what we want is to spend the majority of the time practicing blending and segmenting with known GPCs. So we are making sure that children know those sounds at a glance, and then we're giving lots of time over to practicing. Let's have a go now at blending individual words. So we might have looked at the trigraph IGHI. Now let's have a go at looking at reading some of those words, fright, light, night, etc. We might have looked at the digraph OA, and we've learnt that recently. So let's have a go at blending. So lots of opportunities so that we're building up that automaticity in terms of recognizing those words. Again, Smart Kids do some really handy flashcards for older children for catch-up. So they look like this. So little boxes that are linked to the phases for their free programme. And I like them because they've got the words on one side, but then they have the sound buttons or dots and dashes on the other side. So, when you're revisiting during catch-up, we are looking at the words. If they need that additional support, we can flick over and say, let's have a little look at the sounds and blend through the word. And they've got the common exception words too, which is quite good. So they're really nice for catch up. Now, if you haven't read this book, I would absolutely recommend it. The Art and Science of Teaching Primary Reading by Christopher Such, an amazing man. He says in that book that it's a weak grasp of segmenting and blending using known sound spelling correspondences that most commonly slows children's progress. In particular, children tend to struggle most to segment and blend words with adjacent consonants. So those consonant clusters at the beginning and at the end of words. And that's something that we've found quite often with children who are struggling. We've done quite a lot of work with children who are age 16 and struggling readers at age 16 in secondary and non-readers. And this is definitely something that comes up. So making sure that we are explicitly teaching the skills of blending and segmenting, but using those CCV words, VCC words, CCVC words, etc. So those sorts of words, because once children have got that basic code, actually they can blend and segment with all of these types of words. So it's lots of practice at using those known GPCs to blend and segment those adjacent consonant words. And then lots of phonemic awareness training within catch-up. So, excuse me. So what we want is to really support children to identify, to hear, to identify, and to manipulate the phonemes in words. So phoneme deletion is a really good activity for catch-up. So we would give the children, say, the word stag, and we talk about, okay, what word would remain if we removed the t phoneme from stag, stag? And of course, we'd expect them to say stag. And of course, we could do it with magnetic letters. We can do it by rubbing out on the whiteboard, etc. But supporting them, building them up in their confidence in terms of phoneme deletion, but then also phoneme substitution. So stag. Now, what word would remain if we replace the t phoneme with the n phoneme? So hopefully instead of stag, we'd come up with snag, snag. So phonemic awareness training, really important. Lots and lots of opportunities for manipulating sounds in words. And phoneme frames. Now, it's really old-fashioned, but really supportive for those children, particularly those children who haven't quite grasped that understanding of you can have 1 letter, 2 letters, 3 letters to represent single sounds. So those digraphs, trigraphs, etc. So really supportive to reinforce that, but also supportive for looking at CCVC, so those consonant cluster type words or adjacent consonant type words. So using those phoneme frames, so you can see here little girl using a magnetic letters and different size phoneme frames. So she's got 3 box phoneme frames here dictating the words, and they have to choose the magnetic letters to fit, or use a whiteboard because those are dry wipe phoneme frames. You can make your own. You could buy them, but you can also make your own laminated phoneme frames. I really like these. I think these come from somewhere. I think you can get them online, like TTS or somewhere like that. But I like these whiteboard versions because you've got phoneme frame, but then you've got the lines to practice. So that's really nice. You could work with magnetic letters, but then have a go at writing too. So yeah, really useful for practicing that segmenting for encoding. I'm going to show you a little clip now, because we want to also spend time within catch up and keep up sessions showing children that blending and segmenting are reversible processes, that they're the opposite of each other. So bear with me, we'll see if the technology works. So I'm going to show you this little clip. It's a child using whiteboard, and there's a piece of masking tape diagonally in the corner of the whiteboard, and we've put little sound buttons. So you can see here we've got 4 sound buttons and an arrow. So we dictate the word, the child has to hear the sounds, so they do the sound talk, and then blend by moving the finger across the arrow. Then they write the word, and then they reread the word. So it's that blending and segmenting as a reversible process. Let's have a little look.
Stop. Please stop. Stop. Up. Stop. Stop.
Okay, I'll show you that again. It's so quick you miss it.
Stop. Please stop. Stop. Up. Stop. Stop.
I love the fact she's put the exclamation mark there. Very nice. So now I've seen that done with older children where they have, I'll just get the PowerPoint back for you guys. Older children where they have more than one piece of masking tape. So they've got a piece of masking tape that has 3 phoneme buttons or 3 sound buttons, and then another piece that has 4 sound buttons. So, you know, the children, when you're just challenging the children to how many sounds that, you know, can you hear in that word? So you can adjust it depending on what you want to look for, what you want to practice. Let me just get back to this. So blending and segmenting, reversible processes. We want to maximize the amount of time spent blending and segmenting in those catch up and keep up sessions. Really, really important. And then make the links explicit within reading. So really key. We need to make that concrete bridge into their reading for the children. So if we've looked at the trigraph IGH, then draw their attention to that in the book, particularly if they're struggling, of course. So my little girl comes home with her phonic book that has little pencil marks in it sometimes, and you can see where the teacher has been supporting the child with that. So really important, draw their attention to it. So we might have looked at boat. Let's have a look at, you know, let's underline that digraph. Now, what was that sound? Oh, that's right, we did it last week. So oh, now let's blend through the word boat. Chick, we looked at the CK digraph last week. So do you remember what sound it made? Now let's see if we can blend through the word. So just helping them to make the links into their reading, really importantly. And then, of course, this has been around for such a long time, the importance of decodable texts. And I have seen the power of this in so many schools, of course, making sure that we have closely matched books linked into their phonic phase of development, linked into that where they are in terms of what they know. So that just helps children see themselves as readers. I can do this. And we know that whether we think we can or we think we can't, either way, we're right. And that is so important for reading, and particularly for those children who are struggling with reading. We want them to experience success, and closely matched phonically decodable books support that, and support that self-esteem and that motivation and that feeling of, yeah, I'm a reader, I can crack this code. Now, with older children, that's harder because, of course, their gaps are not linear. And so it's quite tricky. but it's not an exact science. But there are materials out there to support. So for older children, just looking at, working out the right stage for them in terms of the books that are going to help them to practice blending. Little Wandle 7+, I see schools use for catch up, and they like it. And they're children age 7+, so 50 books, I think, as part of that series. Moondog series, really nice for year 5 upwards. And they have the feel of a graphic novel, so older children really respond quite well to those. And again, they follow that sort of systematic phonics program in terms of letters and sounds, so it won't link into exactly what you're doing at Key Stage 1, of course, but for Key Stage 2 children who have come off the program and just need something that is high interest but low readability, they're supportive. I have mixed feedback from schools on Project X Alien Adventures. Some schools say their children love it, but I think they're fabulous because they've got images that are a little bit computer generated, the feel of sort of computer sci-fi, and so some children really respond to that. They're decodable readers. Alien Adventures, they're for children aged 4 to 11. So they span that whole range, but they're a series that's quite action-packed, gadget filled, so you might have children that really respond to that. And then I see these in schools all the time, Barrington Stoke books, specifically designed for dyslexic and reluctant readers, and they're high interest, low readability, so the content is appropriate for older children. So the reading age ranges from 6 to 8+, and interest range goes right up to teenagers. So they are nice because they've considered what is considered appropriate and supportive for our dyslexic children. So dyslexia friendly font, accessible layouts, off-white paper, etc. And then, of course, Fresh Start. So Read, Write, Inc, of course, have got Fresh Start, which is the catch-up program specifically designed for older children if you're looking for something specific. But they also do anthologies, which I know some schools use separately, so you can buy the anthologies separately, and again they're for years 5 to 8, so for children who have a reading age of 9 or below and need that additional support. So really useful little packs there from Fresh Start. In our catch-up sessions or keep-up sessions also, just making sure that we're spending some time looking at those common exception words. I'm quite passionate about common exception words because, of course, some of those common exception words are also high-frequency words, so they encounter them a lot in their reading. So making sure that we are coming back, we're teaching them explicitly and coming back to them on a regular basis. So we need to be reading and writing these daily in catch-up sessions. Important, because again, if children are stumbling over the word said in their reading again and again, that is going to impact on how they see themselves as readers, and the fact that actually I don't think I can do this. So important for motivation and self-esteem. Now, when we're teaching common exception words, we always draw their attention to the known GPCs first. So we will say, for example, in the word said, now let's have a look. First letter, we've got the letter S. Now we know that represents S. Let's have a look at the last letter. The last letter is letter D. We know that represents D. We've learned that. Now, the tricky bit here is the tricky bit in the middle, the A and the I. It's the digraph A and I. Now, children, of course, in year 1 will have learned that as representing the sound A, as in pain, train, etc. So we would be talking to the children about that and saying, actually, here, it's a little bit different. It represents the sound E. So now let's try blending through the word said. And then we need to keep coming back to it, reading and writing again and again and again. It's that repetition, that recall, that retrieval that really gets it to stick. We want this word in their bellies and in their bones, so that by the time they come to writing, in their independent writing, that they're not saying, what is it, Sally Ann, and trying to remember that mnemonic. actually their hand takes over. It's muscle memory when they start to write. So really important that we're looking at those every single day. Doing things like speed write. So speed write, for some children, that element of competition, you know, right, we're going to turn the timer over. Now we're going to have a go. How many times can you write it in 30 seconds on your whiteboards? How many? Count them up. You know, and so you've got 7. How many did you do yesterday? 6. Yay, you beat your yesterday's score. Fantastic. Health warning for some children, of course, the pressure of time actually can be more of a hindrance than a help. But of course, teaching assistants, teachers know their children and they will know whether that will work or not. So speed write, really important, but keep coming back to those common exception words. And just a note from the DFE in terms of children with special educational needs and disabilities. So what they say, what all the research says, is that they need the same process in terms of SSP. They need direct instruction, explicit teaching, but they may need small cumulative steps. So I've worked and talked a lot with the dyslexia expert at Exeter University, and she is saying incremental, more repetition. So really important that we're giving those children lots of practice at blending and segmenting with known GPCs. Instructional routines that become familiar. I think that's important. We don't want to be spending lots of time in catch-up and keep-up sessions explaining new activities. We want some solid routines that we can use so that we can spend our time blending and segmenting. And then, of course, it talks about materials there. So age appropriate, really important for those children, particularly older children. And for some children, the pace will be slower than for their typically developing peers, it says here. But lots of opportunities for overlearning. I love that word, overlearning. That's what makes the difference for those children, so that by the time they meet those words in books, they know what to do. They've got blending as an instinctive skill. That's where we need to get to. That they're not guessing the word from the first, from the first couple of letters. They're blending through the word. They know that as an instinctive skill. Here in the latest report, English report from Ofsted, they are saying in Key Stage 2, teachers are often not trained in phonics. This means that they're unable to use phonics strategies in Key Stage 2 English lessons to help pupils to embed their knowledge of word reading and transcription. I think that's quite important. It's about bringing it back into the classroom. So we may have groups of children going out and having intensive phonic catch-up, but what happens when they come back? We need to make sure that Ofsted say all teachers are experts in phonics and early reading. So all teachers experts. And that's a tough shout, but it's something we need to strive to achieve. So in Key Stage 2, making sure that we've got that phonic knowledge running all the way through the school for teachers and TAs. If you're interested, I've done a recording, phonics subject knowledge. So it only looks at subject knowledge and it's unlimited access. So you can use it as often as you like with your teachers and your teaching assistants this year, next year, etc., etc. So have a look on our website if that's something that's useful. The other criticism that comes from Ofsted in this last report is that quite often teaching assistants, learning support assistants lead catch-up sessions but don't have the subject knowledge and training to do it effectively. So again, we know that there's a link between teacher subject knowledge and standards. That's a link in all the research. So we need to make sure that these vulnerable groups have the best teaching. So considering sometimes it's about stepping back and reflecting on, is this the right person to lead catch up? Is this the right person to keep up at Key Stage 1? We want our experts to be teaching that catch up and that keep up. And again, that's not easy to manage, but striving for that. Again, we run catch-up phonics for Key Stage 2, teachers and TAs. It's currently on an unlimited offer. So you can send as many people as you like for the single delegate price, but also you can share that with another school. So you can team up with schools that you work with and you can say, hey guys, do you want to send your teaching assistants on this? And it will still be the single delegate price. So as long as it's booked from one school, but you can invite other schools to support, to share that cost. And similarly with Phonics First, so generic teaching activities and routines and subject knowledge in this whole day for teachers and teaching assistants aimed at reception and Key Stage 1. And we've got a new training session which is supporting struggling readers in Key Stage 2, and again that's on an unlimited offer, so it means that you can send as many teachers, teaching assistants as you like for the single delegate price of £75, but you can also share that cost with another school that you work with, which makes it really affordable. So for our catch up and keep up, we're going to likely to be focusing for many children on that phonics and decoding to build that automaticity. And that automaticity, of course, is going to lead to fluency. So here you can see the reading house from the EEF, which has all the building blocks in terms of what it takes to be a successful reader. You can see fluency there. That block is nuzzled up to the right-hand side of the house, because fluency is essential to comprehension. If children aren't reading fluently, they're not rolling the film in their brain. They're not converting that printed text into images in their mind. So that fluency is really important. And we know that fluency is a key focus for many schools in terms of struggling readers. So here, standards, and apologies for the great big long quote, but I wanted you to have all of this information on one slide. Basically, it's the reading framework telling us that the Standards and Testing Agency say that around 90 words per minute is a good indicator of when pupils start to read with sufficient fluency to focus on their understanding, but it might vary essentially. So for children who have come off your SSP in year 1, they are reading the last books in that, in that decodable series, and they're reading those A-OK. Then it's looking at, okay, what about their fluency? And there are tests out there in terms of fluency, are they reading at 90 words a minute? But for me, it's more about looking at what they're doing and how they're behaving as a reader. Are they reading at a conversational pace? That's what we're looking for. Are they reading at a conversational pace? Are they reading with expression? Are they taking account of that punctuation? Are they noticing when comprehension breaks down and going back and rereading? Those sorts of behaviours is what we're looking for in terms of fluency. And so for our struggling readers, thinking about what are we doing for those children? If they're okay on phonics, they don't have any gaps, they've internalized those GPCs, they're able to blend, so the decoding's okay, but we still have this issue with fluency. It's thinking about what's in place in terms of practicing reading. And that's the golden tip, really. It's if children are to read fluently, they need to read a lot. They need to reread, those familiar books. So what opportunities are there for practicing reading in school? And again, it's a timetabling thing, but lots of schools do paired reading, of course. They have, but for children who are struggling, they have an additional 5 minutes read every single day. And it may be with a parent helper who has been trained in terms of supporting reading. It may be with a teaching assistant who has been trained. But thinking about how is that organised? Are we doing echo reading, small group echo reading for those children, or choral reading? What is it that we're doing to support those children to make sure that they are reading fluently so that they can access the meaning of the text efficiently? Again, we run focus on fluency training, which is on a half price offer at the moment, if that's something that you're interested in looking at, and you can share that with other schools, the cost with other schools. Now, this comes from the DFE in terms of organisation of catch-up, that wherever possible, teaching should happen at the same time every day, so that pupils know what's planned and don't have to cope with changes. Now, for some children, and you will know your children, that will make a difference. And thinking about that routine business, it's not always possible, of course, in terms of timetables, but the DFCE is saying that's a sort of Rolls-Royce model, really. And the other aspect, linked to that, is the same place every day, and that's really useful. Supportive for children who find change difficult, but also really supportive for whoever's running that catch-up or keep-up session, because you can have your display. Oh, here's our freeze of, you know, our sounds we've covered so far, and we can keep building that as we're going, etc. So useful to think about that. Of course, in Cornwall we have many small schools who just don't have the space, but wherever possible, that's Rolls-Royce model. So effective intervention. Of course, this first bullet point talks about making sure that we're looking at the whole child, essentially, because sometimes there are other things going on that, you know, it's not just the phonics. And actually, if these other things were addressed, then the phonics would fall into place. So, you know, for example, attendance, you know, that's often a real tricky one. It may be that there's a hearing issue. You know, just unpicking, well, what is it that's going on here? So looking at, is there anything else that we need to address alongside the phonics catch up or keep up? Connections made between out of class learning in intervention and classroom teaching. Now, again, I think this is really important. What bridges are we building for children in terms of that concrete bridge from the intervention back into the classroom? And it can be practical things like a little dictation book that I saw in a class where year 5 were going out with a teaching assistant, and they always did their final application sentence, their dictated sentence, in a little book. And that book went back into the classroom and was on the table. And that was really helpful for the teacher to say, hang on, let's have a look. No, you looked at the word said today with Mrs. Jones. So it's in your book. Just remember the tricky bit there. So it just meant that they could make those connections for the children, which was quite good. And then finally here, effective intervention, parental engagement. Of course, we know parental engagement makes a difference to progress in reading. So, you know, we're working really hard in schools in terms of supporting children to make great progress. Now, spending that time thinking about how we can get parents really engaged in practicing reading at home, reading aloud to children to expand their vocabulary, etc., is priceless. And then keeping a sharp eye on progress. Now, most of the SSPs recommend a 6 weekly progress check. So we'll do a step back, and that's the same for catch up and keep up. Every 6 weeks, we step back and we think about, okay, now what sounds do they know? And what sounds are we still needing to work on? And do we need to adjust our groups, or should John have an individual session? Would that work better for him? But more importantly for me, it's that day-to-day assessment, that formative stuff that really makes the difference. So teachers, teaching assistants, cluing into, watching and listening to children, articulating sounds, you know, no schwarring, all of that business, thinking, you know, oh, hang on, Joan really hasn't got that digraph CH. You know, so looking and listening and thinking about what's going on when they read to us. What are they not doing that we need to focus in on? So that sharp eye on assessment and progress. And then, of course, everybody having everything they need. And again, this is really hard. And I know it's really hard in terms of budgets. But if we want our catch-up sessions to run really effectively, people need the stuff that they need to run that effectively. So I was in school recently where the teaching assistants had their little basket, and in the basket they had their 6 whiteboards, 6 pens, they had their, you know, flashcards, mnemonic cards, etc., so that they could get on, and the session went with pace. You know, there's a sense of urgency to the session. They could get straight into the learning, which was fantastic because they had everything they needed. And of course, I don't need to talk to you guys about this, put learning to read at the heart of the school, because you know, you know that. We know that it is difficult in terms of things that children miss to go out and receive intervention. It's really tricky. You know, they are going to have to miss something. But the advice is, do not miss read aloud. So whatever they miss, don't let them miss read aloud. So here in the reading framework, it tells us to continue to develop pupils' language and vocabulary and encourage a love of reading. Teachers should make sure they listen to and discuss the same texts that their peers listen to in story time and book club time. So what's happening is, if children are going out when we've got that lovely story time, or going out and we're doing our book club where we're looking at, you know, branching out and recommending books, etc., to children. If they're missing all of that, then what's going to happen is, yes, they might catch up on phonics, but then they're going to have a deficit in terms of, you know, vocabulary development, and hearing fabulous language being read aloud by their teacher is one of the key ways that we are going to encourage children to want to become readers. And we know that the will informs the skill. So not missing that story time or that read aloud is absolutely essential. And here this is reinforced by reader side. Struggling readers often placing classes where pace is slowed and the reading focus moves away from books to a steady diet of small chunks of reading. In an effort to help prepare them for reading tests, we sometimes starve readers rather than lift up struggling readers. This approach contributes to widening the achievement gap. They must have interesting books to read. Bring books to the students, surround them with interesting books daily. So for me, it's that, yes, we need a systematic synthetic phonics program, and we need to be following that really carefully for our struggling readers, but also we need a systematic, rigorous program for developing reading for pleasure too. And so read aloud is really, really important to that. Now, there's the Ofsted latest subject report, which I've mentioned throughout this little part. There's a recording for that if you're interested, and there are some of these key aspects in that recording, but also we look at all the recommendations from that in terms of writing too. Okay, I'm realizing that we're running out of time very quickly. So improving reading comprehension, the next part. So why the use of questioning alone isn't the answer. So let's have a little look. So questioning, really, really important. And there are some fabulous resources out there to support us with questioning and question and answer in the classroom. Things like Vipers. I know loads of schools use things like Vipers from the fabulous Literacy Shed Plus, which is that acronym for, you know, questioning, vocabulary, inference, etc., etc. But then it's looking at how else are we teaching reading? I've had lots of feedback from schools recently that Ofsted are asking, what knowledge are you teaching in Key Stage 2 for reading? And subject leaders are saying, what do they mean? And actually they mean some of this stuff here that's on the Reading House. So the knowledge that we're teaching to improve reading comprehension is, of course, vocabulary. So breadth and depth of vocabulary is essential to reading comprehension, is essential to being successful in the big wide world overall. So breadth and depth of vocabulary, systematic teaching of that, thinking about things like, you know, Latin and root Greek words, Latin and Greek root words, for example, fabulous. I really think they are so important to be teaching, because if we teach that dict, D-I-C-T, means speak, then we can problem solve in our reading. That dictaphone, we can make a pretty good guess at that, or predict, we can make a pretty good guess at that. We get sort of 6 words for the price of 1. So what are we doing in terms of teaching vocabulary? Are we pre-teaching vocabulary for our text that we're studying? So thinking about vocabulary instruction, really important. Grammar and syntax, really important. So knowledge of, words, phrases, clauses, complex sentence structures or multi-clause structures, etc. So grammar and syntax, really, really important. Text structure is really key. So, if children have a really good understanding of the structure of the text, they can use that to help them to make good inferences. So, for example, a traditional tale, we know that they tend to end with a happy ending. So when we're reading with that in mind, and we can make sensible predictions about what will happen to the main character, for example. Or if we're reading a quest story, we know that a quest story involves a main character, and the main character is trying to achieve a goal, and they'll come across obstacles throughout the way. Then it will be easier for children to make really good inferences about characters' motivations, etc., in the story. So teaching text structure, really important, and comprehension monitoring there in the middle. So comprehension monitoring is hard for our struggling readers, because of course often they don't know when they don't understand, they don't recognize when they don't understand, and they're not making the right meaning from the text. For comprehension monitoring, we need to model it lots and lots. So often I'll read a paragraph and then I'll paraphrase. I'll stop and I'll go, oh, right, so-and-so's doing this. So model what that comprehension monitoring looks like. but then also model what it looks like when it breaks down. So reading a paragraph and then saying, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not quite sure what the main message is there or what the character's actually thinking. I'm going to go back and I'm going to reread that paragraph a little bit more slowly. And so we're modeling that. And that's a strategy we use even as, you know, confident grown-up readers. I'm always reading research documents and thinking, what on earth are they talking about? Go back, reread to get the gist of it. So model it, teach that explicitly. And then, of course, so all of those aspects are here on this list. We've got fluency as well, of course, essential to comprehension. If they're not reading fluently, they're not going to be maximising their understanding of the text. But then the bottom bit here, background knowledge and understanding of the world, that is absolutely key to comprehension and particularly inference. If I said to you guys, if you were reading a book and it had included the sentence, there he knelt at the top of the Eiffel Tower, what would you infer? There he knelt at the top of the Eiffel Tower. Unmute yourselves, folks. What do you think? Oh, thank you. So somebody's pointing to the ring finger. Yes, thank you. So there he knelt at the top of the Eiffel Tower. Yes, most people say someone's about to propose, perhaps. Now, of course, we're not able to make that inference if we didn't have that knowledge of our cultural tradition of getting down on one knee to ask somebody to get married. So often inference relies on knowledge of the world and its cultures. And so background knowledge and understanding the world is absolutely essential. I always remember reading The Time Traveller's Wife at the same time as one of my good friends, Debbie, and I cried from the first page of that book. But of course she didn't. She was saying, what on earth's wrong with you, pet? But actually she's very cold-hearted. No, she isn't. She's not cold-hearted at all. She's a lovely, sensitive girl, but her life experience is very different from mine, and I made different meaning from that text. I made different connections to that text that she didn't, and that was to do with my background knowledge and my understanding of the world. It was to do with my personal connection to that text too. We need to take all of that into account when we are supporting our children with their comprehension. Background knowledge is so important that we've added it. Tree and I have added it to the Reading House from the EEF because it is foundational. And the way that we can support our children with this is through our rich curriculum. Our rich curriculum, in fact, all areas of the curriculum teach reading. So it's thinking about, are we sequencing our curriculum carefully? Do we have rich, even rich visits and trips? All of that helps children to build that background knowledge and understanding of the world. And then when it comes to their text, thinking about, are we pre-teaching that subject knowledge that they're going to need for that novel so that they're able to make meaningful connections with that text by the time we start reading it. And that's really easy to do. If we're looking in reception and we're just about to look at a book about colours, then let's get the paints out and just do a bit of mixing first and talk about colour before we start reading the book. I was in a class recently where they were looking at, they were going to read a non-fiction book about birds of prey. And the teacher just had a 1-minute clip on YouTube or whatever platform, looking at, I think it was sparrowhawks, just to activate that prior knowledge and in some cases, for some children, give them the knowledge in the first place, not just activate it. And so we need to be thinking about our curriculum areas and the conversations we have around that curriculum area and how that links into our texts. So really, really essential. The research tells us that time-limited inference and comprehension instruction can help, but it's time-limited. The research says that about 10 sessions will yield the same outcome as 50 sessions, because what happens is once you've taught children an aspect like in inference, for example, and explored it and taught it explicitly, the progress will plateau, because then you need to be working on that wider aspect of vocabulary, background knowledge and understanding of the world, comprehension monitoring, etc. So really interesting looking at how we are teaching comprehension. As I said right at the very beginning of this little section, that Ofsted are asking subject leaders about that. What knowledge are you teaching for reading at Key Stage 2? What knowledge? And that's interesting. And of course, all skills are activated by knowledge. So that's something to be thinking about. We run a session on inference if that's useful. And again, it's on half price for whole school, and you can share that with other schools. What we want for improving comprehension are active, practical strategies that help children to engage deeply with texts and develop real reading comprehension. So we want children to be engaged in things like book talk, roll on the wall activities, framing questions, zones of relevance, ordering characters, active strategies that get them under the car bonnet of the text, get them discussing the text. Oh, I think this. Oh, hang on a minute. What about that? Sort of discussion is what we want. That is deep engagement in text. What we're doing when we're doing those sorts of activities is we are getting children deeply engaged, enjoying reading and talking about books. And yes, we can do the questioning stuff afterwards. So if we perhaps ordered the characters from Cinderella, let's stand in a line holding our whiteboards up. We've got Cinderella, we've got the ugly sisters or whatever it is, the horrible wicked mum, etc. Get into order from kindest to meanest, and the class are saying, oh no, we think dad should go up there, we think the ugly sister should go down there, etc. And they're discussing why naturally. And then we can say, after doing an activity like that, we can say, okay, who do you think is the meanest character in Cinderella? Because that question on its own is quite a closed question. It doesn't really develop their thinking. It doesn't develop that depth of thinking that we want from our readers. Questioning is great, but it only tests comprehension, really. It's useful to further discussion, but it's about the active stuff that really gets children engaged in text. Deep engagement is what we want. So are we using strategies that ensure children deeply engage with text? And do all teachers and teaching assistants have that pedagogical content knowledge to develop reading comprehension effectively? So subject knowledge is one thing, of course, but pedagogical content knowledge is about what's the best way of teaching this particular subject. And do they all know, particularly at Key Stage 2, if you are still expecting Ofsted, just in case Ofsted say, what knowledge are we teaching at Key Stage 2 for reading? Again, we've got a little recording on the science of reading, if that's something that would support your teachers and TAs. But we also have a new day called the Real Reading Comprehension Day, which is in response to the latest Ofsted subject review. And it's on an early bird, and I think it's till Friday, 24th of May, whenever that is, 24th of May. So the early bird is £150 for unlimited delegates, but you can share that with other schools. So even if you have 3 schools that you work really closely with, you can say, okay, do year 5, 6 teachers want to come from all school, all 3 schools or whatever, for a single delegate price. So if that's something that's useful to you, just keeping an eye on the time, then do have a look on our website and check out the information about what we're doing on that day. Okay, dates for the diary, folks. So I can't believe I finished on time almost. So what I will do is I will endeavour to send you the links here, because I know that on a handout, so hopefully you received the handout with the Zoom link for today, but on your handout, of course, you can't click them. So in an email, I will send the recording of this session in case you want to share it with a head teacher, or if your head teacher wants to share it with your subject leader that's here today. I will send you this recording, but I will also send you in that email the links here for each of these days, because I've tried to put together some good links to websites that give you good resources for those special days coming up. So if you haven't received the email by Friday, will you please let me know? Because sometimes, or check your spam box first, because sometimes if an email has lots of links, it goes straight to junk or spam. Sometimes it just disappears into the ether. So we've got things like Outdoor Classroom Day, which is very soon, a couple of days. Literacy Trust have got some good resources there, and outdoorclassroomday.com. Empathy Day, fabulous. If you haven't checked out empathylab.uk, I love them because they suggest books that help us to develop empathy in the classroom. And I think that's something that we need in our world at the moment. We need to be supporting our children to develop tolerance and empathy, and it's something that we can do in terms of changing society. So I think Empathy Day, fabulous, 6th of June. Refugee Week, a lot of good links there. Book Trust, always a winner. Books for Topics, lots of schools use, of course, and some other bits and pieces there. Literacy Trust, essential. National Writing Day coming up in June. So again, I've popped a couple of links in there. Pobble 365, I think most schools are using, but again, really rich images, one for every single day of the year, with great little writing prompts there that can be used to support things like grammar, story starts, etc. Got some links for Pride Month. And then we've got some links for back to school and settling in. So for the next academic year. And then the next academic year, we've got Black History Month. I really like This Is Book Love, which is the last link there. They have some fabulous recommendations. And National Poetry Day. Now, I think days like this are really, really valuable, because it might just be one day, but actually the impact of that really spreads out. So, for example, my little girl's school, National Poetry Day last year made a massive impact on her reading. She has ever since loved reading poetry out loud. So National Poetry Day, it might only be one day, but actually the impact ripples out across the year. World Mental Health Day in October, some links there. And then just the information about our Train Your Whole School for 150 quiz, and sharing costs with another school. So it's currently half price, and you're welcome to invite other schools along to share the cost. So all the sessions that are included in that Train Your Whole School for £150 at the moment are on this slide. There's also the option to book 2 for 1. So they're £50 or whatever for 2 for 1 if you don't want the whole school coming. And then there are unlimited places on these 3 sessions coming up. So there's many TAs as you like on my colleague Tree's Improving Impact of TAs in the Classroom, where she looks at things like questioning, etc., developing phonological awareness. So I look at that phase 1 type activities for preschool, nurseries, and for reception for those children who need it. And phonics first, of course, unlimited, so as many people as you like. And then, of course, we also run bespoke whole school training, and we're getting booked up for next term. So some of the dates in the sort of classic inset dates are being booked up. So some schools book way in advance. So if you are interested in anything inset days or twilights, etc., then do drop us an email. And we're doing lots of cluster stuff at the moment. So schools are sharing the cost with their partner school or a few schools in their MAT, etc. So do drop us a line if there's anything we can support you with. Okay, thank you very, very much, folks. And look out for the email that I'll send out with all the links. I hope you found the session useful. I've talked 10 to the dozen, tried to fit as much as I can into an hour. So have a lovely rest of the day, everyone. It's sunny here in Cornwall, thank goodness. So have a great rest of the day. Bye, everybody.